Hello Elite Dangerous Commanders. I'm Voldriel Zaztek, I've been doing PvP since 2018, and I'd like to share with y'all a build that I made for the Python Mark II, as well as give commentary on the ship with regards to PvP. So let's get right into the build. I have 4 overcharged incendiary pacifiers, a gimbaled overcharged corrosive multi-cannon, and a long-range feedback cascade Imperial Hammer. For the utility slots, I have a pretty standard loadout of 4 heavy-duty shield boosters, a resistance augmented, and a thermal resistant shield booster, all with supercapacitors. As for the core internals, I've got lightweight alloys to keep my speed up, an overcharged grade 5 power plant with thermal spread, because this thing is pretty power hungry. I've got the normal thrusters with dirty drag, but I've got this 5A frameshift drive with the SEO. I've got shielded for integrity and stripped down for speed. This thing turns out to be very useful in PvP, especially for interdicting. I've got the normal 4D lightweight life support, your typical charge enhanced superconduits distributor, and your G2 long range scanners. As for the optionals, I've got that prismatic reinforced high cap, 2 GSRPs, 2 HRPs heavy duty deep plating, and of course the frameshift drive interdictor. This entire build was the first one to ever be made completely with all experimentals. I'm pretty sure I got this thing done just a few minutes after the ship dropped and the update came out. And so I'm pretty proud to be the first one to actually have this thing all put together. I also managed to become the first commander to get a kill on the PvP leaderboard with this ship, and since then I've killed about 35 players, including a 5v8 which I unfortunately forgot to record. I did, however, record some other fights with it, and so I'm happy to share these with you now to give my perspective on how it performs. So this first fight is with one Commander Maria Star flying the Fer-de-Lance. And when the Python Mark II was first announced, I honestly had a very different set of expectations for it. I thought it was going to be a slower, fatter Python Mark I, which wouldn't make it very useful for fast-paced fights like this. But I was pleasantly surprised to find out that this ship performs very similarly in flight to the Fer-de-Lance. It almost feels like it has the hardpoint layout of a large ship, just without quite that amount of health, much less power, and of course very much worse optionals. It has pretty decent convergence for all those guns on it, and while I could make the excuse that I'm missing all these Imperial Hammer shots because the mediums are too far apart, it's really just because I'm rusty and I'm having a skill issue. When I first saw the ship's model, it seemed quite wide to me, and I was worried that ships like the Fer-de-Lance were going to be able to apply damage to it very easily. But in practice it has a fairly narrow front profile, although it does have a significantly wider top profile than the Fer-de-Lance. The ship has a mass lock factor of 17, which means not only could I mass lock Commander Maria Star here if she tried to low wake on me for some reason, but I can also mass lock ships like the Chieftain and Crate, which make up a decent chunk of the anti-Thargoid builds in the game currently. It follows that the ship has a higher mass, around 300 tons heavier than the Fer-de-Lance, and in practice this means that the ship rams quite a bit harder than the Fer-de-Lance does. Just don't try this without a shield, because not only is it bad practice, but the Python Mark II has paper-thin hull, even worse than the Fer-de-Lance's. As you can see here, I've managed to break Commander Maria Star's shield mid-bank, so I'm whipping out the corrosive multi-cannon to apply better damage to her hull. The pacifiers that I'm running on this build do very good shield damage, and they actually have some of the best damage per distributor draw in the entire game. However, one of the weapon's weaknesses is its ability to apply damage to hull. When a ship's shields break, their hitbox becomes significantly smaller, which makes it harder for the pacifiers to apply all their pellets to the ship. My incendiary pacifiers also do 90% thermal damage, which is almost always the highest resistance of armor. However, what I can just do is apply corrosive and ram them a few times in a 1v1, fail to hit 3 separate hammer shots in a row, and then shoot some pacifiers at the end to finish off this commander. Apparently Commander Maria Star here is using her scroll wheel for her pips, which puts her at a pretty severe disadvantage, so I went off to find another Fer-de-Lance to try this build out on. This is Commander Liela, probably pronounced that wrong, but this is actually probably the very first commander that invited me to a Discord server that has anything to do with Elite Dangerous PvP, so it was pretty refreshing to have a fight with this commander again after so many years. This fight started out pretty even with us jousting and trading shield, but eventually I did a few pre-turns, I managed to get into a knife fight with this commander, and my pacifiers started applying very well to the top of Commander Liela's ship at very close range. I can't quite tell for sure, but it feels like this ship has slightly weaker vertical and lateral thrusters than the Fer-de-Lance. It also has a higher pitch and yaw rate, so that's a trade-off where you might not be able to keep range control as easily, but you can turn faster. However, it's not that big of a difference compared to the Fer-de-Lance, and so what it's really going to come down to is the timing of your boost. When the ship was set to release, a few members of the PvP community were very concerned that the pacifier loadouts that the ship was very likely to run would cause everyone to run drag, and that would significantly nullify the skill involved in flying. However, it seems that since this ship is so similarly flying to the Fer-de-Lance, you don't really have any reason to use drag, at least any more than you would if you were flying a Fer-de-Lance. So for me, that means that I would rather run full incendiary on my pacifiers for that increased damage output. It's at this point in the fight that I start to pull off some of those pre-turns to start laying into Liela's shield. This ship can pre-turn pretty well. You might have to turn a little bit further than the Fer-de-Lance would have to get the same effect, but that really just comes down to timing, I think, and you can do so quite handily. If anything, the slightly different boost patterns of the two ships might actually contribute to increasing the skill cap, because players are going to have to get used to adjusting to the flight models of not just the Fer-de-Lance, but also the Python Mark II. There is one complication to this, however, specifically with regard to the pacifiers that I'm running on this build. Typically with plasma accelerators, after every single boost, when the ship is in stall, you can fire your plasma accelerators and get a hit on your opponent. But with the pacifiers, the reload time between shots is actually greater than the boost cycle of the Fer-de-Lance, and I'm pretty sure also of the Python Mark II. So you're going to have to adjust for that in some way. Some people have suggested putting screening shell for faster reload times, but I don't know about that. I really like my incendiary damage. Regardless, I'm about to end this 1v1 with an insane gigaram that brings Commander Liela's hold all the way down from 85% to 0, and so we'll be moving on to our next fight. This fight is actually a 2v2 between 4 Python Mark IIs, myself included, and we're all running slightly different builds. The meta for this ship is obviously very much still in development by the PvP community at large. The ship just came out a couple of days ago, and this is very exciting to me actually, because for the past 5.5 years, if I wanted to bring something viable to an organized wing fight, or even an organic wing fight, my only options really were some variant of the Fer-de-Lance, which we have theory crafted to death at this point, or some really boring to fly big ship or a cope small ship that is probably just going to get killed in one plasma ram. But this also means that this build is very, very likely far from what the ship is actually capable of, fully optimized, and we're going to have to see what the PvP community comes up with regards to making very good viable builds. The first temptation of any PvP theory crafter is to immediately try to replicate the most viable and popular Fer-de-Lance builds onto this ship, and this isn't necessarily a bad idea, but we do have to remember that while these ships perform very similarly in flight, there are some significant differences in the outfitting window. For one, with the size 6 shield and all of those hardpoints, it has a good amount of power struggles, and it's going to be a challenge to fit the same types of hardpoint layouts onto this ship that the Fer-de-Lance would use. An example of this is gimbaled multi-cannons and short-range blasters, which could be run on an armored plant on the Fer-de-Lance, but on this ship, it's almost going to be impossible without sacrificing significantly in terms of your health pool from GSRPs, or just not being able to have an armored plant having to go overcharged. The biggest caveat to this is that the Python Mark II actually has very good thermal capacity. It's been tested by some PvPers I know that you could run 4 large plasma accelerators on a grade 5 overcharged power plant, and you can consistently stay at around 150% heat, which is good for having that thermal conduit damage boost, without spiking up so high into like the 400% and beyond. That would definitely just cook your ship to death. What this means is that this ship is going to have different capabilities, and the PvP community is going to have to figure out what is going to work, what can we do, what is too much, and what can the ship handle in terms of balancing the power plant and the hardpoints. The only thing I can almost say for certain is that you're going to want to put a good amount of shield on this build. It's going to be an interceptor, considering that it can use the frameshift drive overcharge so well, so you're going to be the first person in your wing to pull the enemy team, and you're probably going to be first focus because of that. So having low 3000s in your shield numbers probably isn't going to cut it, especially considering that this thing just has an awful hull. The hit points are just not there, and the pretty anemic optional internals are going to make it so that fitting banks onto this ship, other than like a hot bank for proccing thermal conduit, is just not going to be worth it. But like I said earlier, almost everything is fluid, and there are so many possibilities for what's to come next for this ship. I personally don't think that this is going to cause the meta to be destroyed and that the skill cap of the game is going to be lowered and that PvP is over. I think that what this is a new opportunity for commanders to get into PvP for the first time. This is going to be an opportunity for experienced PvPers to shake things up a bit, maybe redefine the meta in a few ways, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a good time for everybody. The 2v2 on screen is actually a very good example of this. Commander EDCR is using full gimbaled frag cannons on his Python Mark II. His wingmate Sentient Brick is using plasma accelerators, and my wingmate Geek is using some version of gimbaled multi-cannons and railguns. So as I ram Commander EDCR to death here, I'd like to encourage everyone that hasn't tried out PvP yet to maybe try it now. This is a better time than ever to see the meta mixed up and see what we can come up with, see what's fun, and start getting good with everyone else. A final point that I want to make is that I don't think that this means the Fer-de-Lance is dead. Long live the Fer-de-Lance, and that the Python Mark II is now the new PvP meta ship. I think that both ships are going to end up being better at different roles in a wing fight as opposed to the other. Some build ideas are going to work better on the Fer-de-Lance, and some other build ideas are going to work better on the Python Mark II, and whichever one you want to fly is just going to be up to you. Personally, I'm going to be flying both. I have over 6 Fer-de-Lances at this point, and I'm sure that I'm going to start building a lot of Python Mark IIs as well. And so, what are your thoughts on the Python Mark II with regards to combat, or just to the ship in general? Let me know in the comments section, and if you want, you can check out my other videos. I have a lot of PvP content. So if you like what you see, feel free to like and subscribe to my channel. And always remember to buy as much arcs as you possibly can so that you can be cool like me and have this Python Mark II with the incredibly ugly paint job that I got for it and the Buy Arcs logo on my dashboard. It's really important for your PvP performance, and it will actually increase your damage output by about 30% if you do so. So always remember to do that. So as I wrap this final fight up with yet another ram, I'd like to wish y'all good luck out there and thank y'all for watching. See ya! The first ever fuel reading
Oh,
of the Python Mark
what?
II in Elite Dangerous. Let's go. It's
Oh,
happening.
wait.